You are listening to the Mark Guzman Podcast Experience. On this episode, David Pio from BCRE Real Estate joins us, and we discuss commercial properties, China, how to get started with basic real estate investments, and we drink one hell of a Moscato. Cheers. I've had dessert wines that are very this is pretty full, pretty heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
It's
good.
literally
I like that.
Yeah, my two favorites are Robert Mondavi Moscato.
Oh yeah.
And there's this other Moscato that I found that was super good, so I bought some. I mean, I only have like 2 bottles.
Yeah.
You know what? You got to come to my house because
I still haven't been.
You've never been to my house?
I've never been to your house. You've invited me for some of the parties,
You've
but
been to a
I've
few
never.
fucking parties, bro. So I was in the Philippines in a place called Cebu for a wedding. I was out there for a couple days, and one of my boy that he knows the president's son very well. He was like, "Yeah, man, there's this good Mexican restaurant." I'm like, "Mexican in Philippines? For real?" He goes, "Trust me." So we go there. The best quesadillas I've ever had. First of all, the Mexican was super good, but they had one of the biggest tequila lists I've ever seen. So we just get some Don Julio shots, and I was like, I want to try some of these I've never even heard of. So Don Julio has Don Julio Regular, Reposado, Añejo, 1942, right, which is 100, 150, and then they have another Don Julio, and I had never seen that one, and they have something that's a whole another level called Asombroso, and they have a 5-year, a regular, a 5-year, and 11-year. Well, shots were like $200 a shot. I'm like, I look online. I was like, you know what? I think I might just buy the bottle and get it back home. I bought 2 11-year bottles, which are $1,100 a piece, and 2 5-year bottles, which are $250 a piece, for $900 out the door. Dude, we did a blind taste test with my roommates. Dude, the one, first of all, we couldn't even drink Don Julio. We're like, this tastes like shit. They didn't know which one was what, right? The 5-year was super good, dude. The 11-year, it's like tequila with no bite and vanilla. It's fucking amazing. So
Yeah.
When you get a chance, you got to come to the house, dude. I'll let you have some. It's so good.
I was in San Francisco do you know Ronald Garcia? He's on my team. He works here at the office. We're in San Francisco for the Inman conference, and his friend from Cuba comes over, and he's talking about all the rums he likes to drink. And there's one in specific called Zacapa. And we tasted it. It tastes just like Scotch, except a little on the sweet side because it's rum. And it was amazing.
See, I used to be such a big rum fan, and now I'm like, and I had some good stuff, supposedly good stuff in Cuba when I visited. No, it didn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot you went to Cuba. How was that?
It wasn't long enough. It was, so whenever I travel, because I travel like 4 months a year. Whenever I travel, I look at how long does it take to get there, and would I rather go somewhere else? So, I really like Miami, but for the time it takes to get there and the cost to get there, I'd rather just go to San Diego, right? And I know a lot more people. I'm much more familiar with it. It's not to take anything away from Miami, but if I'm going to spend X amount of dollars and X amount of hours on a flight to go there, I'd rather just go to SoCal, right? And then we start asking about, like what we were talking about earlier, Europe. Well, I mean, I have to go to Asia a lot for work anyways, but if I'm going to be on a flight for that long and spend that much money, on the cost difference, I'd rather just go to Asia and have a much better advantage in, like we were talking about, on food, the nightlife, the beaches, the weather.
You said food in Thailand was $44 for 9 people.
Oh, yeah, Vietnam, there was 9 of us that went out to eat on a decent, pretty nice spot. And we spent $44 for 9 of us. It was nothing. And we had 12, 13 full days. We didn't eat everything at all, not even close. But I mean, even in China, which is a little more expensive than Vietnam, or Thailand or anywhere, there's always going to be more expensive places, obviously. But then even the street food is good. It's just the prices just can't really compare it.
Yeah. Just want to let everyone know that David Pio is here on the podcast as my guest. He is known as a good guy to know, and he's been a broker here in the Bay Area since 2006 and focuses on commercial property equity and value. And I know this guy knows his numbers when he's evaluating properties. Dude, you're like a Rain Man.
Not quite. I try to be, though. I need a little help from Excel.
So how did you come up with that? I know your website's area.com,
Yeah.
right? So how did you come up with that and Good Guy to Know?
So the website, when I first started in 2006, everyone was a broker before the crash, and that's right when I started. Everybody had markguzman.com, billybob.com, joyceanderson.com, all these people. My first name has an E at the end of it. My last name is P-I-O, which is not very commonly spelled. No one was ever going to memorize how to find my name. If I could find PO.com, which is spelled PIO.com, I would have taken it, but it didn't exist. So no one was ever going to email me. I live in the Bay Area is longer, but back then I didn't really know what size and scope of real estate I was going to do, even though I know I wanted to start doing commercial. But I mean, it's a lot easier to remember. And I mean, even today, I won't talk to someone for a while and they'll be like, "Oh, what's your email?" And they're like, "Oh, wait, I live in the Bay," or something like that, right? And I always have to correct them, but they already kind of know it just because it's so easy. I mean, my number is 815-2000. I just kind of got lucky, and it's just one of those easy numbers, In regards to the whole A Good Guy to Know, that was actually a marketing group that I paid to kind of redesign everything for me because I'm not good at marketing. And they just kind of redesigned everything for me. And when I, wanted to rebrand myself a couple years into real estate, then now that I had a solid footing, and they kind of helped me come up with all that.
Yeah, cool. Now you do mainly commercial, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you have a very interesting job because you work with a lot of foreigners and also people here in the U.S. You were just mentioning that you travel to Asia quite a bit for work. So why don't you explain a little bit how that works?
When I first started, the recession was just kicking in, and a lot of people were putting their money out of the stock market.
So you actually started in 2006.
I got my license in 06, and 07 is when I actually first started, because in 06 I still had another job, and I was basically winning my way out of that.
So you're right there at the crash.
Yeah, so I started in literally the worst time. And when I first started, my first clients were relatives, friends of friends, friends of relatives kind of thing. And people just didn't trust the stock market. And this is back when Richmond, you could get, 2 units for $80,000, and just the prices were absolutely insane.
Yeah.
You couldn't get financing for anything, but you could buy it cash. And when you're, 40, 50, 60, if you've had a fairly decent job and, you saved a little bit, it wasn't an insane vision to have someone with $50,000 or $100,000 to buy 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, whatever the case may be, or even be lucky enough and put 50% down. So in the beginning, that's what I did for a lot of my clients. Well, if you buy something for $100,000 and you're clearing $1,500 a month with no mortgage, another year or so, you could kind of do it again, and maybe you could get a little bit of financing and then do it again in another 8 to 9 months, and it kind of snowballs from there. And then, of course, property values obviously went up. In regards to my foreigner clientele, that was a combo of visiting China a few times and doing a few trade shows, people finding me on YouTube, which was really random, and honestly just kind of dumb luck. Like one of my biggest clients I met at a property showing who didn't like that one, but I found her another one that was actually off market that an agent used to have listed and then took it off, and it was a neighbor of my partner, and it was kind of pretty interweaving, and from then on we just kind of grew the relationship from there. And they're one of those families from China that's bringing in money to buy a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, right now, a lot of the international from China, anyways, is actually slowing because it's getting really, really, really tough to move money out of China. A couple years ago, literally, you just go to a bank and file some paperwork and just know what you're doing and know the right people. They charge 2%, and that was kind of it. Now, though, it's getting really, really tough. And actually, recently, China arrested 2, for lack of a better expressions, head chair people of 2 of those big companies that, buy big hotels and, acquire big pharmaceutical companies. And so when big shots start getting arrested and they are, other people are fleeing the country, everyone kind of takes notice and, slows down and, tries not to be that, brazen about moving money out of the country. So that's been happening recently.
Yeah. Yeah. And now at the trade shows, do you speak Mandarin?
When I did it, no. I've studied Mandarin for about 2 years, but the last 6 or so months, I was doing very well. But my last 6 months of studying, I was just way too busy with work and travel, and I just couldn't keep up. So I kind of stopped. So my last 6 months were basically useless.
Mandarin is pretty interesting language to learn. Like every word has 3 tones to it.
4 tones.
4 tones, and it could have a different meaning each tone.
Yeah,
Correct?
so it's 4 tones. If I'm not mistaken, Cantonese is 8 tones or 9 tones, but it's basically just how you pronounce the word. It can change the meaning. Not every word has 4 tones, but I mean, depending on how you pronounce the word, it could definitely change the meaning. And obviously, a lot of it is context. But I speak Spanish, and a lot of people are like, oh, Chinese must be so much more difficult, blah blah blah. And honestly, it's actually not. It's just memorizing a whole new set of words. But in Spanish and a lot of other languages like French and French and Italian, you have to conjugate the words like there's I am, you are, they are, things like that. Whereas in Chinese, there is no conjugation of a verb. You just add the word, and then there's like one or two subwords like particles after it or before it that change if it's past tense or present tense or future tense or a command and things like that. So it changes a little bit with Chinese versus Spanish. So you don't have to know one verb, 6 to 12 to 18 different ways. You just know one verb, and you know which one of those particles to add to kind of change the past, present, future definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so you had a translator then before?
Yes, so we had translators when we did it. Brian and I, my partner, did it for the first time, and we didn't really know what to expect. And it was really something to see. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. You see the E3 for video games and stuff. I mean, this thing was next level stuff. I mean, there's literally people selling cities, for lack of a better expression, and it was in a giant hall. I don't know how many square feet it is, but I mean, easily 10 to 20 football fields. It's gigantic. And we're in Beijing, and I remember walking around and just kind of looking at what some of these people did. And there was this group selling literally a chunk of a city, and they had all their units lit up. And I mean, they have the mountains, the lake, and I mean, this thing had to be probably about a 10, I'd probably say about a, sorry, 10 is over exaggerating. I'd probably say about an 800 to 1,000 square foot squared model of just the layout. And like a third of it would just be scenery, the river, the mountains, things like that. And then they had like a 1/8 or a 1/10 scale, however big it was, of the buildings and where the retail stores would be and the heights of the building. And literally they could show you, hey, this is a commercial unit, or hey, this is the penthouse. Do you want that unit? And if you bought it and sold it, they hit a number and then that light turns off so people know you can't buy that unit. It was crazy.
wow.
I mean, it's just like, I mean, they must have spent, a couple $100,000 just on displaying it. So when Brian and I went there, we just had a small booth. We didn't really know what to expect, but it was, I mean, next level stuff. People would literally come up to us and say, what are you buying, or what are you selling, and where is it at and how much? And we're like, we're selling our services in America. And they were just kind of flabbergasted. And then a lot of people were taking the time to sit down with us and everything. But I mean, there are people literally just go around and collect pamphlets for different cities, different things, and figure out their pricing and say, okay, I want that city and this is what I got and let's buy it. It was insane.
That's high tech marketing.
I've
right there.
never seen anything like that. It was crazy. It was interesting to say the least. I mean, you got like anime girls and you have people walking around with giant, head decorations and, costumes. It was next level stuff. It was pretty interesting. So.
And then at one point, I know after the market crashed, when the recovery started happening, 2009, 2010, it seemed like they said 40 or 45% of all the buyers in the Bay Area were foreign buyers, cash buyers too.
It might have been. I mean, I know at one point it was something like, 1/3 of every property sold in the East Bay or San Francisco was cash because financing was still a pain, or maybe it was half. But there was a good chunk. For Canada's always led the foreign buyer in the U.S. for a long, long time.
Really?
It was for a long time. They always recall their neighbors, logically. And then for, I guess during that time, our dollar crashed, whereas their dollar was really strong. So it got really cheap, kind of like what we're talking about when we travel overseas. If you go overseas and that $44 to feed 9 people changes to, $300, well, the country doesn't become as cheap. A couple years ago, it was expensive to go to Europe. Now it's a lot cheaper because the euro went down by, a third. So to the locals, it's all the same, but to foreigners, it got a lot cheaper. So kind of the same concept. A lot of people in Canada that were in tune with the market put their money in America just kind of as like a safe haven, safety account, savings account. So they would buy a property for 100, 200 grand. Not only would our values go up, but then the dollar kind of bounced back and got stronger. And then they just kind of sold and they kind of won twice. Their American currency appreciated and their property appreciated. So they kind of won twice. They, maybe their value on their home went from 100 to 200 grand. So there's $100,000 profit. And to us as Americans, it would be 100 to 200, but to them, maybe they put in 70 and now they're getting out, basically 250 because of the currency trade. So it's kind of like I said, it's kind of like they win twice because they're basically playing the whole Forex concept.
Yeah.
So, but then China came in and obviously started really taking over.
And investments in China can be a little bit different than out here with how they reset their currency, correct?
So, well, China basically moves its currency as to how they see it. A lot of countries either just let it float, like the US, the euro, the British pound. It kind of just, whatever the market does, it happens. Some countries like Thailand and Hong Kong say, hey, we're going to follow another currency. So the US dollar goes up, so does the Hong Kong dollar, depending on interest rates, things like that. Whereas China, what they say there, when everyone says, oh, they're currency manipulators, China still likes to export goods, right? So basically what happens is China will say, well, okay, we're going to make our renminbi, our Chinese dollar weaker against other currencies. So that way the Chinese people aren't going to notice it, but other countries are kind of going to go, hey, everything just got cheaper in China for the exact same good. Well, I'm going to buy my stuff in China. So whereas before I could have bought a handbag in China for $100, if China makes their currency weaker, hey, I could go to China and buy that same handbag for $70 or $80. Now, no one's going to fly to China to save $20-$30. But if you're a manufacturer and you have to place an order for tens or hundreds of $1,000s of items, i.e. an iPhone, right? Well, that 5, 7, 8% difference adds up tremendously.
Okay. So what do you think about the Bay Area market? Where do you think we're at right now, and where do you see it going? Like to me right now, and I've said this to a few people, it feels like 2005 for me. Like a few years before another correction happens.
Mhm.
Seems like the mentality right now of everyone is they have to buy. They're desperate to buy, basically.
Right. So, well, a few things. The Bay Area is a bubble within a bubble, and I don't mean a bubble like this going to pop. I mean it's kind of in its own world. The Bay,
Like an
San Francisco Bay
ecosystem,
Area,
its
yeah,
own
it's its own little
system, yeah.
market within the California market, which is, within the U.S. Nowadays, in 05, 07, a monkey could have bought a house. I mean, literally, give me an application, show me that you have a social security, and I'll get you $1 million house, right? Anybody could have done it. A raccoon could have bought a house. It was insane. I mean, literally, there was, straw men, fake people, fake entities that didn't even really exist buying houses, and a few people got caught up in that, thankfully. But that was all fake. You obviously do houses. It's still a pain in the, to get a loan. I do well, you do well. I don't know if you've ever tried to get a loan, but I had to refinance twice in 2014, and it was such a pain. And my credit's 740 plus, money in the bank, do well financially, 30% equity in my home, and they still gave me grief from lowering my mortgage, from $3,100 to $2,300 because they literally told me by the numbers on the paperwork, you can't afford your home. And I had been paying $3,100 for 4 years, and they're telling me I can't afford my own home by making it $700 a month cheaper. I mean, just logic goes out the window.
I know an attorney that was trying to refinance his home probably about the same time, 13, 14, and he has a $1.2 million home in Orinda, and he was trying to refinance only 35% of the value, and he was denied by 5 lenders before finding the 6th one that did it for him.
Yep. So I have a client that used to work on Wall Street. He sold literally everything except for like a house and a condo. Sold everything 9 months before the market crashed. Market crashed. He sold this company for 170 million, 150 million, something like that. Sells everything. Watches the market crash. Watches the Dow hit, whatever it was, 4 or 5, 5 or 6,000. He goes, I'll throw all my money back in. Now the numbers look good. He and I this was a couple years ago. He and I had lunch. This is when people are like, where's the next bubble? Where's the next bubble? He and I both kind of came to the conclusion that the same bubble doesn't happen twice. There's not going to be another housing bubble because everybody's looking for the housing bubble. There's not going to be another .com bubble because, Uber makes money. Airbnb makes money. Yahoo and Google make money. You might have a problem with the valuations on what they are and their ratios on the stock market.
But they're different from the .com.
But they're making money. In the .com, it was kind of like the same thing. You could have been a monkey or a raccoon and opened a dogs.com. Look, guys, I have a website, and there you go. A VC would have given you a couple $1,000,000. You go public and then you crash. That's just what it was. So the same thing doesn't hit twice. The problem is all of our economies are tied in together. Like, they didn't have a housing bubble in Greece. They didn't have a housing bubble in Russia or China or Europe or South America. We had the housing bubble. We were the ones doing everything crazy. Now, they were doing it to an extent in other countries, but not like, we were doing it like it was on steroids. But when it hit us, it hit everybody else really tough. Number one, because it's a global economy, and number two, because we're the biggest economy at the moment. Well, if something happens in China, which, for example, a lot of the companies are intertwined with the government, and a lot of the companies don't make real money, and they're trying to figure out how are they going to pay off their debt to these people that are outside the country and inside. If something happens there, that's a China problem, but because it's a China problem, it's going to affect us. One of the things I was looking at recently is that I very rarely do homes. I do a couple homes a year for like family and friends. I'm selling a buddy's house, and he's helping me look at prices, and I'm like, houses in this 600,000 to 800,000 ish range in the Bay Area, which is not a lot for the Bay Area. I know it's a lot for everywhere else, but in the Bay Area, that's kind of normal for two people in the East Bay. They're not moving. These homes are sitting on the market for 30, 60, 90 days, which again, for you and I, for the last 7 years is very unnormal. It's not normal. Usually it's up on a Thursday and you got 2 offers by next Friday. And at the same time, I read an article about how, because of all the restrictions in China, Chinese investment in either quarter one or quarter two of this year is at 11 or 12% what it used to be from the year before that. So imagine you have $1 billion of Chinese money coming in, and it literally dries up from $1 billion in one quarter to $100 million. Still a ton of money, but if those were the type of people buying that kind of stuff, again, kind of going back to all the tough restrictions, if money dries up coming from China, and like you were saying, 1/3 or 45% or even 20% of people are from China, there goes 1/5 of your home buyers. Kind of changes the dynamic
at that point.
Yeah, and it's not even a correction like, oh no, prices dropped by 50%. I have an investor buddy. He's like, I'm waiting for things to crash again, and I'm like, dude, that's
not going to happen.
It's not going to. I mean, you might see a 5, 10, maybe even 15% thing. I was like, but the housing fundamentals are there. Maybe you thought you could get 700 for your house because the neighbor got 675 and yours is a little nicer. A correction means, you know what, you can't get 700, you get 660, 670, 640. Your housing value doesn't crash, but you're not going to get as much as you thought, perhaps.
Yeah.
So where do I see the Bay Area market? It's still doing well. We're kind of in the bubble of the bubble. And again, I meant by bubble, I don't mean it like it's going to pop. I mean like our own, little, micro economy that where all the fundamentals are there. Employment's low. It doesn't have any hint of slowing down. We're still hiring. People are still coming, and people are leaving, unfortunately, because they can't afford it here. So things are there, but it's at the point where it's like there might not be any more room to keep growing. Chinese aren't buying, apparently. Canadians aren't buying like they used to because of the numbers, and there's not enough room for people to keep coming and pushing prices up unless you're an ultra wealthy. And it feels like we kind of got pushed to that point because all the people moving in are making in these tech jobs and these biotech jobs $100,000, $150,000. But just because you're making $150,000 doesn't mean you can afford $1-2 million pieces of property. But you still see really active stuff, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
In the there's no such thing as a $300,000 place, but anything that's between 3 and 6 or maybe even 7, it just flies off the shelf in the East Bay. And in San Francisco, it's obviously a little higher.
Yeah, I heard this morning, it was on the radio, median price in San Francisco right now is 1.4 million.
Yeah, I was going to say 1.2. Yeah, so that sounds about right.
Yeah. So let's give some people some tangible advice. If they have $50,000 to $100,000 to invest, what's your go-to? Should they stay in residential? Should they venture off into commercial? What's the next step?
So with 50 to 100, you kind of can't get into commercial, unfortunately. I mean, maybe in certain other neighborhoods, but again, I'm just speaking from the Bay Area. In regards to the Bay Area, you can't get anything for $300,000. You can barely get land for $300,000. So with commercial, you usually need anywhere from 25 to 40% down, right? Depends on if it's industrial or a warehouse or, an apartment complex, things like that. But figure about 30, 35% down is kind of like your sweet spot. Residential, you get in with as little as 3.5-5% down. So if you don't own your own home, especially, and you've got, and I have, younger friends of mine, because I've got a pretty broad range of friends, that say, hey man, I've got 30 grand, 40 grand, 50 grand that I've saved up. I don't really know what to do with it. And I don't really want it in the stock market or whatever. And I tell them all the time, I was like, well, you rent, or you kind of, you help your mom out with bills, because, a lot of people still live with their parents, even in their mid to late 20s, for a multitude of reasons. Go buy a 2, 3, 4 unit building. Don't buy a house. Go buy a 2, 3, 4 unit building. And I literally had this conversation with a friend of mine, and he goes, yeah, but I'm really, really never home. I help my mom out with bills here and there, but I'm either at work, or I'm traveling for work, or every once in a while I'm on a vacation, and I don't even know where I really want to leave. Okay, well, you've got 50, 60K saved up. Go buy a triplex or a fourplex. Make sure one of the units are like a 2-bedroom, or a 1-bedroom if you don't like roommates. Occupy one of the units and rent out the rest. Now, obviously, you have to make sure the numbers work, and the typical thing is, the worse the area, more risk, you get a higher return versus if you buy something nice and in the hills. But look, it gets your foot in the door, get you something. I have other friends that have done this, where they'll buy a fourplex a couple years ago for 400 grand, and they're making $3 grand for 3 of the units, and for their own unit they were paying $1,000 a month rent. Now it's just kind of a wash, and the 3 grand gives them a couple $100 a month to play with, and that's after them paying rent. They're basically living rent free and getting a couple $100 a month. Then what they'll do is, same guy called me 2-3 years later and goes, hey, I'm kind of done living in this little 1-bedroom apartment, what can I do? Well, now his fourplex went from 400 to like 550. The rents all went up. He moved out, bought a house, because he had saved money again, right? He saved another 30, 40, 50K. Put another 10% down on the house. So now he's got a house that he enjoys. It's a $2,000, $2,500 a month mortgage, right? But his fourplex now makes $1,500 a unit, and since he's not in the unit before, now he cash flows $2 grand, $2,500 a month or so, and that wipes out his mortgage. He basically lives mortgage free and debt free on the fourplex, and he's got equity on the fourplex because it went up in value, and he's got his original 10% equity on the house. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I got started. Bought a duplex, and bought a fourplex, and then finally bought my house. And the money I was making from my 2 and 4 units wiped out my mortgage, and it, basically made me neutral. So I didn't have to stress about living. Basically, anything I made from work was like a bonus.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I got lucky buying it during the recession, but I mean, you could still do it now, because
You can still do it now, because I run some numbers and I tell that exact same advice to some clients, but it's amazing how many people ignore that because they want that dream house
Yeah.
now. They want to buy that house now.
Mhm.
And really, if you have a lot of, and it's not even a lot of patience, if you just have a little bit of patience, especially people renting for many years,
Mhm.
and it's like, seriously, you can't rent another 2 more years.
You don't even have to live there 2 years. You have to live there with the intent.
Well, I say
of
2 years because really, after 6 months to 12 months, at that point, if you saved up enough money, especially if you're cash flowing on that first purchase, you then go buy another building,
Yep.
and then you go move in that one,
Yep.
and you can still do FHA as long as you're moving into that building.
Mhm.
And then here you own like 4-unit buildings.
One of my clients that I didn't help him sell his first 2 fourplexes, I helped him with the third one, and he's actually going to be looking to buy his house soon. He owns a fourplex in Union City, Hayward, and then Richmond was the one I sold him, because he basically made the argument that he wanted to move closer to work in San Francisco, and he kept moving closer and closer to the BART station, which all his properties are closer and closer to work / the BART station. So now when he eventually buys his house, we've already done the numbers. I've already seen his whole portfolio, which is what I do. He's going to buy a house, and he's married, and he can buy a house, and he's going to cash flow after mortgages, and he'll have equity. This isn't even including if he pulls out money on his properties, which he probably isn't going to do because he doesn't need to, but out the door, he's going to clear $3,500 a month. Now, if you ask most people, how can you afford a $3,500 a month mortgage payment? You have to be doing pretty well. You have to be making, 7-8 grand a month. That's 90 grand a year. I mean, $3,500 is about
And
a
that's
500.
pushing it too.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
$3,500 is about a loan of $500K. You could get quite a bit for $500K just for a loan plus a little bit of down payment. And he's going to be making that out. He's literally never going to have to worry about it. This is including vacancy and reserves and management fees. He's going to make $3,500 on average per month, not doing anything. And from what I remember when he started with like 60, 70K, and he bought his first one in conjunction with his brother, and like he had 35, his brother had 35, and they split it. But I mean, he's still going to clear, like I said, $3,500 a month of not, I mean, if you give anyone out there listening, if you get $3,500 a month out the door, like a lottery ticket, you win the scratcher that says you're going to win $3,500 for the next 20 years. I mean, your mortgage is gone and then some. You don't have a lot to worry about. And the way I look at it is, yeah, I could wait, like Mark said, 2 years. Maybe you could buy one property and then a second one. Especially if you're good at saving, you can easily do 1, 2, 3 properties. And like I said, it's fun on a multitude of levels. Forget the money, just the peace of mind to know that your mortgage is wiped out. Like when I bought my house and my mortgage was $3,100 and I was clearing $2,500, my mortgage was $600 a month, right? That's nothing. I mean, even a minimum wage job, you can clear $600 a month if you do it right. I mean, literally, I had clients that were talking to me. This is again during the recession when everyone was starving. Well, don't you need the money? No, I don't. I'm doing this for fun. Like literally, once I sell your property, I'm going out of town for a month. Like this is just for fun. I don't need you. And then it kind of changes the dynamic on things. Now imagine saying that to your boss. No, I don't need to work graveyard shift. I'd rather work my 9 to 5 or my 10 to 8 or whatever it is. It kind of changes the dynamic on things. It's a lot of just free peace of mind.
Yeah, and just buying 2 buildings is also not the end of it, because you can keep going from there. You can then do an exchange out of those 2 buildings, and instead of owning 2 4-unit buildings, you then exchange into a 16 or 20.
Exactly. If the value goes up, you change those. You go into a higher property that's better neighborhood. Maybe it's higher yielding, easier to manage. I mean, there's a multitude of things. Or you could just, hey, my friend's case, my 4-plex that I bought for $400K is now worth $550, $600. Hey, I want to pull out 50 grand and I've got 50 grand saved up. I want to buy something else. My mortgage might go up, but I'm not worried because my rent's still more than take care of it.
Yeah. Now, you run your business a little bit different than most real estate agents in that you don't just deal with clients. Most agents, they'll sell you a property. They list your property for sale, and eventually, they might get your repeat business back and forth. You do it a little bit differently in that you actually sit down and help build like strategies and portfolios. You're constantly reviewing their portfolio too, right?
Yeah. So for a few things, what I mainly do, yes, I sell real estate, and obviously that's where I make my bread and butter. Not a lot of people do consulting. So as brokers in California, other states are a little different, but in California, you basically have to a certain extent, kind of know taxes, but you can't give tax advice. You have to kind of know law, but not give law advice. It's kind of like the reason we fill out our contracts, but we can't advise them what to do and all those kind of things. Well, in commercial, the better versus worse commercial brokers will know a little bit more than most. I try to know, I have an omnipotent complex. I feel like I have to know everything about everything or I don't know anything. So I've literally talked clients out of listing with me. Client of mine sat with me. He'd already met with a broker, literally had listing paperwork ready and had all the numbers ready. And he goes, I was referred to you. Basically, you've got the listing. I've owned my property for 30 years. It's $1 million. And I told him not to list with me because the guy was 82, but super sharp. And I said, hey, not to be morbid, but if you wait till you die, you can give it to your kids tax-free under $5.5 million under the death tax, and this is how it works, and so on and so forth. And he looked at me and he goes, okay, so you just talked me out of selling my $1 million property that you would have made 60 grand on. How do I pay you? And I said, honestly, I normally charge $250, $300 an hour, but not to sound morbid, hopefully your kids call me when you die, if they want to sell. So what I do is when aside from giving all these advice for my clients, I don't just sell their property. I look at what they own and I figure out what's the best bang for the buck. And my best example is if you go to a bank, which is how I break everything down. If you go to a bank and put $100 in it, or let's say you go to a bank and you put 100 grand in it as an investment, and they give you $100,000 a year, you're making 10%. Not bad, right? No complaints. But now let's say it's 4 years, 5 years later, and you're still making 100 grand, but that money that's been sitting in the bank account has grown to, let's say, $200,000, and you're still only making 10 grand out of that original 100 grand you put in. You're still making 10% on what you put in, but now you're making 10%, or excuse me, 5%, which is $10,000 on double the money on 200 grand kind of sitting in the bank. If right across the street is Chase Bank instead of Wells Fargo, and I tell you, hey, you can literally take your money out of Wells Fargo And instead of getting $10,000, you could get $20,000, and all things being equal, the same amount of risk, same amount of issues. Everyone's going to move their money to make double the return. And that's what I do. Is a lot of people will buy homes, condos, 2 units, fourplexes that at the time they were steals. I mean, 100,000 for 2 units making $2,000 a month. It's a steal. But if today you're making $2,000 a month and that same duplex is worth $400,000, I could show you something else that you could buy for $400,000 that makes you not just $2,000, but makes you $4,000. And what I do is I basically put all that literally on my spreadsheet, break it down by property with the Prop 13 taxes before and afterward. And I basically literally put on a chart. And I had a client that sold 18 units with my partner and I. And we literally put on a chart and said, you should sell them literally in this order. And that's exactly what she did. And now their equity's grown, their cash flow, I think they're making about an extra 50 or 60% extra on the same amount of money that they spent. So imagine instead of making $1,000 a month, you're making $1,500 or $1,600 a month by literally doing nothing other than doing some paperwork, and someone else does all the work for you. And that's my specialty. I look at your whole portfolio and I tell you, this is what you should do. And my clients will typically call me every year or two, and I reach out to them as well and just kind of to say hi and how things going. But they'll call me and say, hey, this house that I bought through you, or this fourplex I bought through you for $300,000, this is what I'm making. Could I move my money somewhere else and make more? And a lot of times, because they bought it in the recession, they didn't buy these giant complexes. The answer is yes. And in some instances, which I have clients like this, they did buy a big building. They bought 15 units, 20 units, 8 units for $1 million, and now it's worth $3 million. And they're asking me, should I sell it, or should I keep it, or should I pull money out and buy something else? And I'll literally show them all the options and say, this is what you should do. And honestly, this is the thing I would do.
Yeah. Now, when you're looking at investment property to help one of your clients purchase, what are some of the basic things that you look for? What makes it a good deal from a bad deal?
When the first thing I look at is when the other broker provides me the info, I always presume it's BS. I want to know what's the actual numbers and what's the risks. For example, like I mentioned, if you buy in an area that's a little tough or an area that's really far away from the jobs, the further you get away from a job center, the more risk it's going to get. The reason why is, you might make great money, but if things go sour or, your economy takes a hit, the further away you are, the harder you're going to get hit. It's going to suck the most, right? So that's the first thing I look for, is the risk part of it. And then after that, I look at, is there a story? What's the going in number and what's the story behind it, right? Houses, people want to know, oh, this is my house, I loved it, blah, blah, blah. In commercial, it's like that, but it's all numbers. For example, I have a client buying a property in Sacramento that's he's going in making very, very little money, about 4.5% return, which is exceedingly low. I mean, that's numbers you get in Oakland. And why would you
Sacramento's hot right now too.
Sacramento's hot, but here's the thing. He's buying a property in Sacramento. It's in a good area. It's in a decent area, and he's buying it making 4.5% return, which is nothing. I mean, I could find you stuff near Lake Merritt that makes 4% return. And why would you ever buy in Sacramento when you can get by Lake Merritt? So he's buying it, and I remember his first thing he asked me was, why in the hell would I buy in Sac making that little money? And when I showed him what he can do to the property in a year, 6 months, 18 months, 24 months, and then what the new value would be, I mean, instantly his whole opinion changed. The reason being is because his rent roll is really low. The guy that's owned the building hasn't raised rents to keep up. Rents in Sacramento have been increasing by 10, 15, 18% per year for the last 3-4 years. This guy's been increasing it by, 3 to 6%. So he hasn't been keeping up. And to give you context, his average tenant is paying something like $1,750, $1,760, and a property that's, 8 blocks east in a worse area that's much more dead and a little bit kind of is pay. I mean, their same units are renting for $950, $1,000. So when I showed it to my client and we drove the area and kind of saw everything, and he saw what his competitors are charging for rent, tenants in that building that he's buying are paying $750. Next door, they're paying $1,000, $1,100. So, I mean, unfortunately it's at the tenant expenses, and that's a whole nother conversation. But to go in and buy a building where someone's making $750 and you could be charging $1,000 a month is huge. Now times that by dozens or hundreds of units,
It's a
now
lot
you
of
have a
money.
whole different number. And basically what we did was he's going to buy something and he's going to be making, it's a 75 unit building. You know, you add $250 times 75 and you adjust the cap rate back into it. He's literally buying this place for like $6 million. He has to put a good amount down, and he's going in at a 4.5%. But after he increases the rents without even remodeling or doing a single thing, he's going to be making 7.5%. So, and again, 7.5 versus 4.5 might not sound like a big number, but when you're talking about a couple $100,000 years, things like that, his property's going to go from 6 million to my estimate, and I'm kind of conservative. It's going to go from 6 to like 9.25 within 18 months. And I don't know a lot of places that you can make a third of your money back in 2 years in a thing like real estate and still have upside. You know,
Yeah.
it just doesn't happen. So, and I've done it with this same client before in Oakland, where he bought a building for 6 million, and 3-4 years later, we're putting it on the market for 11 million, and it's not even on the market yet. And I have people asking me, can I have the numbers? Will you take offers early? Can I please see it? Can I show it to my clients? My answer is like, no, like, let me finish the marketing, because, you know, and it's the same thing, but it's just much more accelerated.
Yeah, and we're only talking about cash flow and equity. We haven't even touched on depreciation that you can take on these buildings.
Yeah. So in real estate, it's the second friendliest tax write-off business. Number one is entertainment. And that's basically because the wealthy and corporations provide money to the government. The government listens to them wholeheartedly. So thank your Congress people for this, I guess, in a kind of shrug manner. They tell the IRS what the tax code is, and the IRS just enforces it. So all the people getting mad at the IRS, you're getting mad at the wrong people for taking your taxes, whether you're for it or against it or whatever the case may be. But in regards to, you know, property, you can depreciate the whole building if it's an apartment over 27.5 years, or 39 years if it's a commercial building, like a retail building, a warehouse, things like that. You can go one step further and get what's called accelerated appreciation. And that's basically where you write it off even faster. And this is why you see a lot of commercial people having to buy and sell within 5 years, 7 years. It's because they've already taken all the tax loss, which hits their bottom line, so it saves them money. And usually their loans have to be refinanced in that same amount of time. Exact same reason why that client that's selling the building in Oakland I mentioned for 11 million, it's because in the next, I think, 9 months, he has to get a new loan, or he could sell it. We've already done the numbers. It makes more sense for him to sell it versus do a new loan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's how that, you know, he's one of the clients that, I go have dinner with or lunch with every, couple of months and say hi. And, hey, David, what do you think? Look at my stuff. And I get all the numbers from his management, and I took a look, and I'm like, this is what I would do. And I showed him once, and he's like, yeah, you're right. Let's go for it.
So can you explain a little bit more accelerated appreciation, because I've actually never even heard of that before.
Okay, so I forgot the other term of it, but accelerated appreciation is we'll stick to houses. Residential means houses, duplexes, fourplexes, 100 units, 1,000,000 units. It's just residential. You basically
Now,
get
is this accelerated appreciation or depreciation?
I'm sorry, accelerated depreciation.
Depreciation,
My
okay.
bad if I said appreciation.
Actually, I think I said it wrong.
Oh, okay,
first.
okay. But basically, you get to depreciate the property over 27.5 years. So let's use a simple number. Let's say you paid $27,500 for a property. The government basically lets you say that you lost on your bottom line, for lack of a better expression, when you do your taxes. Hey, I lost $1,000 every single year for the next 27.5 years. Well, after 27.5 years, to the government's eyes, it's as if your building has completely whittled away and it's worth nothing. Doesn't matter if your building was built in 2017 or 1968. When you're a new buyer, you get to depreciate that over 27.5 years. So now extrapolate that and make it a big building. $27,500,000. You basically get to depreciate $1 million. Basically, take a loss of $1 million as if you lost it in stocks, or as if you had a bad year and you lost $1 million. You basically get to lose $1 million in your taxes when you're not really losing $1 million. It's just theory because someone came up with it and the government said, "Sure, let's do that. That sounds cool." Well, accelerated appreciation means, hey, you know what? The building loses value over 27.5 years. But you know what loses value a little faster? Windows, carpets, doors, doorknobs, garage doors, kitchens, things like that. And you basically pay a group, and it only makes sense once you start to go over like $1 million. But you basically pay a group to come visit your property. Sometimes they do it on Google Maps nowadays. And they come out and they figure out, you know what? You're $27,500 dollar building that you bought, half of that money is things like doors and windows and carpet and stuff like that. And those, instead of discounting over 27 and a half years, we're going to discount over 5 years or 7 or 10. And what it does is it kind of front loads, so it gives you more sooner of the write-off. So instead of only taking $1,000 write-off per year for 27 and a half years, you maybe get $2,000 for like 5 years, and then you get $1,500 for 2 years, and then you get $1,000 for another few years, and then it goes below that to like $700 because you've already taken so much of it.
Okay.
And what it does is a lot of people will buy a property, they accelerate the depreciation, and they basically push everything to the front. And after 5-6 years, they kind of lost all their bonus tax benefits. And for them, it's like, okay, let's go find another property I can buy that makes the same risk, the same return. And what I'll do is I'll just front load again all the tax write-offs, and I make extra bonus money.
And they just keep doing that over and over
Oh,
again.
yeah. And they do it on all their properties and things like that. And they just repeat. And this is why, again, you see commercial change hands so often, is because one of the reasons is the tax code.
Wow.
That's a look on your face.
amazing.
No.
So one thing we didn't do at the very beginning was talk about the wine that we were going to try. And this is actually a late harvest Moscato from EOS Estate, Tears of Dew.
I think it's pronounced EOS. I might be
EOS?
wrong though.
Tears of Dew, late harvest from Paso Robles. It's a Moscato. It's actually really good. You like it?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Mark asked me what kind of wine I wanted, red or white, and I was like, no, I like dessert wine. I'm a little pansy when it comes to alcohol. Like, I can drink a lot, but I like it to be sweet.
And you're from Portugal, and in Portugal they have some amazing wines.
The port wines, oh yeah, really
Yeah.
good wine. That's one thing they don't fault on, is dessert wine for sure.
Yeah, I love port wines, and the one thing I was disappointed about here in the US is that most of the port wine is tawny port.
Yeah.
That they serve in restaurants. But when you go to Porto in Portugal, where the majority of the port wine comes out of, they have 13 varieties of port wine, and I fell in love. They were all really good, but I
Mhm.
fell in love with Ruby Port.
See,
That-
I haven't had a lot of port wines. Usually I prefer white dessert wines versus red dessert
Well,
wines.
they have like 5 or 6 variations of white ports.
And see, I've never had those yet because they don't sell them in America very often.
Yeah.
You go up to Napa, and I feel like every dessert wine that's existed, and I usually like the white dessert wines. I like some red dessert wines too. Don't get me wrong, like ice wines and things like that, which is basically just liquid sugar. But there's some that are basically like white wines with brandy in them, like Angelica, if you've ever been to Visa Tui.
Yep.
So I really like that kind of stuff because it's still strong. Like, I'm a shot guy, but it's still strong, but it's still sweet. So it like kind of kills off the bite of the liquor.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely next time you're in Portugal, go to Porto
Mm-hmm.
and go they have port tasting right across the bridge, and they have, I forgot, maybe they have 11 or 12 different port wineries there. And they walk you through the entire history of
That's cool.
how they called it port wine and that sort of thing, which is pretty neat.
That's
to
pretty
do.
cool.
But yeah, they have literally 13 variations from an extreme white wine
Mm-hmm.
to a dark red wine.
And I've had like Fonseca Porto and a few other port wines and stuff like that, but I don't think I've had Ruby, and I don't think I've ever seen a
Yeah, Ruby
white
was definitely my
dessert
favorite,
Portuguese
hands
wine.
down. It was so smooth.
Interesting.
It's sweet. I've tried buying it here in the States and can't find it.
I think I could show you a good website that helped. I've found a lot of, earlier we were talking about tequila and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The crazy discount I got, like 70% off this really high end tequila. There's a website I found that's basically like the Google for finding alcohol, and it's insane. I mean, it finds it by the retail store. It's crazy. So I'll send you
Yeah,
this
send
link,
it to me.
and you might, hopefully that'll help you on your search. And you could try some of the liquor I bought, the tequila, and I could try some of this Ruby wine.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we're actually out of time right now. I want to thank you for coming on to the podcast. I actually want you on my other podcast series, Real Estate at Large, because I think we can get into a lot more depth
Sure.
in talking about investment properties. I think that would be something very interesting to really dive into. So why don't you tell people again your name, David Pio, your company, how they can contact you if
Sure.
they're interested
So
in working with you.
my name is David Pio. I work with a company by the name of BCRE, which is short for Benicad Commercial Real Estate. We're out of Pinole, but we also have a satellite office in San Francisco. But to be honest, I mostly work from home or abroad, anywhere with a laptop and a cell phone. My number is 510-815-2000. If you want to look up all my information, it's pretty simple. I have all the typical social media pages, but the best way to kind of start your journey and see what I've sold and what I do is www.iliveinthebayarea.com.
Perfect. Thanks.
Sweet. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Thank you so much for listening to the Mark Guzman podcast. I want to thank my producer, Sam Lubman, for doing a great job in putting these podcasts together. I want to thank David Pio from BCRE Real Estate for coming out onto this podcast and really dropping some investment knowledge for you guys. Again, if you're interested in commercial property investment strategy planning, give David Pio a call. And make sure to check out our other podcast episodes. We're working really hard to bring you a lot of value. Thank you. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.